I want to get a sense of the audience. How many people are here from the FDA? So quite a few folks from the FDA. How many people are here from business and industry? Good percentage. How many people are reporters? I have a few. Not too many raising their hand. We have a few. How many are here from the patient advocacy community? Good. We have a good group of people here. I appreciate that. I'm here from the National Health Council. And the National Health Council is an umbrella organization of patient advocacy organizations. We were created in 1920. We provide a united voice for people with chronic disease and disabilities. Our core membership are the leading patient advocacy organizations in the United States, groups you would know like the American Cancer Society, American Heart Association, as well as groups representing rare and less known diseases. We also have other membership categories including the provider community, the family caregiving community, as well as business and industry. But the governance is controlled by the CEOs of the patient groups. And we focus in on two things. One, we want to ensure that all people have access to medical care that meets their needs. And two, we focus in on ensuring that innovation occurs so that the many people without effective treatments get the treatments that they need. You know, a quote that has been thrown out multiple times, there are between 7,000 and 9,000 diseases, of which we have effective treatments for about 500. We have a lot of work that needs to be done, and the patient community is committed to ensuring that we develop safe and effective treatments. I want to leave you today with two messages. And the first message is that your participation is critical. We in the patient community created the energy that was the catalyst for the very first PDUFA agreement. It was the HIV/AIDS movement that was saying we need access to treatments. They were chaining themselves to the fence. They were protesting. They were coming to the FDA saying, I want access to experimental drugs, and the FDA appropriately said, we don't know if they're safe and effective. But that community said, you know what, I'm going to be dead in 6 months, let me try. We need to figure this out. That created the basis for early access compassionate use program. It was that community that said, we are taking too long, there's a drug lag, we need to do something. The first PDUFA agreement was enacted, and you saw a great reduction in that lag. And with the second PDUFA, you saw review times start to get shorter. And it was at that point in time that the patient advocacy community stepped back from the process. And we saw great advances in the HIV/AIDS arena. We saw great advances in the oncology space. But for many of the other conditions, we were not seeing the same level of advances. And in fact, it was at this point in time you saw a dramatic shift to the consumer perspective. And I'm here to say that the patient community and the consumer community are part of the same group of people. We are the same stakeholders. But a consumer perspective and a patient perspective are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And I applaud Sally for addressing that distinction in her comments. For people with chronic conditions, they're people that will have their disease until they die. They will go in and out of the healthcare system to manage their lives, to manage the quality of their lives. But ultimately, they will likely die as a result of their condition or issues related to that condition. Consumers are people that go in and out of the healthcare system as needed. If they are skiing and break a leg, or they have an infection, their perspectives are very, very different. And even within a disease state, as you see the development of treatments flourish, the perspectives shift. If you look at a condition like ALS, there's a strong sense of urgency to have some effective treatment. And for many with ALS, they would be willing to take substantial risk to get the opportunity to have another year of quality life. But if you look at conditions with multiple effective treatments, like heart disease, the perspective starts to shift more to a consumer perspective because there are effective treatments. If you look even within a specific condition without effective treatments and look at where you are in the stage of the progression of disease, like Parkinson's, somebody newly diagnosed may be less likely to take a risk on a treatment that might prolong their lives, but somebody at the end stage of Parkinson's who's having a hard time having a relationship with their family, having a hard time communicating, having a hard time sleeping, might be much more willing to take a substantial risk. The perspectives shift depending on where you are on that continuum of the spectrum and your own personal goals and aspirations. It's critically important that we understand that point. And it was during the PDUFA 4 negotiations that many of us in the patient community started to re-engage because the focus became all about safety. And while there's no patient advocacy organization that does not support safety, we are equally concerned about getting good, effective medicines into the hands of people who are suffering under the burden of their disease or do not have particularly effective treatments currently. It was in that agreement that we saw a huge push towards safety, and we felt we needed to have more input into the process. And one of the great things that happened in PDUFA 4 was that there was a push to have these stakeholder meetings. And that allowed us to engage in PDUFA 5 in a very, very different way. Many of the patient advocacy groups in the room met on a regular basis with the FDA. We had the opportunity to say what was important to us, what we wanted to see in that agreement. And one of the things I learned through that process was that the things that were important to us in the patient advocacy community were often on page 3 or 4 of other people. In particular, or in addition to the negotiators from the biopharmaceutical sector and the FDA. They were primarily focused on getting the agreement done, understanding what the mechanisms would be, how the review process would work, and how the cost would be delegated. All of which was critically important and nothing that we didn't care about, but it was not our priorities. Our priorities were we wanted to see a radical change in how benefit risk was communicated to the general public so that we could see how that judgment was being made. You know, it was at that point in time the patient community said loud and clear, this is not a scientific decision. There may be scientific inputs into the determination of benefit and risk when FDA makes an approval. But at the end of the day, benefits and risk is a judgment, and it has to reflect the perspectives of the end user. And up until the last PDUFA agreement, we had very little way to understand how FDA was making that judgment. So we called for a framework, and FDA has been piloting that. We called for more resources for patient-reported outcomes and biomarkers. We called for more resources for rare disease. We also called for the 20 meetings to be held at the FDA. We were incredibly appreciative of the process of going through the FDA discussions as a stakeholder group, but we wanted additional input. All of that came to bear in PDUFA 5. We're now in the midst of implementing it, and I would say it is going incredibly well. We're at an all-time high in terms of drug approvals. We have incredibly sophisticated, groundbreaking treatments coming forward. We have the FDA for the first time meeting with large groups of patients and their advocates to really understand the burden of disease, to understand the impact on their lives, to understand what was important to them. And in every meeting, people have walked away saying, what I thought was most important to this patient population wasn't what was most important. It was something else. What an incredible aha moment for all of us to have. All of that information needs to be brought into the regulatory process, but it also needs to be brought into the continuum of drug development. Now, I've asked this question before, but how many people in the room have an Apple phone? Raise your hand. Okay, most of you. How many of you have Samsungs? Few of you. But I like to say you guys are the innovators. How many of you have Blackberries? Here's where you see everybody from the FDA. In fairness to the FDA, I understand that they are much more secure. Having said that, there's not a single company that develops these products that would even change the color on the outside of the casing without doing extensive research to understand the perspective of the end user. And I'm going to wrap it up with my last point, and that is this. Thank you, Terry. We have to do a better job of incorporating that perspective into drug development. We need to remove the barriers that prevent companies from engaging with patients at the front end. It needs to be done appropriately. We need to be able to take that data and bring it into the regulatory approval process. And it's more than just meeting with one individual patient. There is a science that has been built up over the course of 60 years on how to do this. We use it in the social sector. We use it in politics. We have a president that's been elected twice using these methods. We can understand at a granular level what is important to patient populations, segments of patient populations, and we can take that data, make much higher value products, get it into the label so it can be part of the discussion between a doctor and a patient, and they can make an informed decision about the treatment that they want to take for them. That's where we need to go in PDUFA 6. I thank you for your time, and I encourage you to participate in the process. Thank you.